There's much to talk about. Let's get right now to our panel. Joining us here in Washington is the Vice President of the Americas Society and Council of the Americas, Eric Farnsworth. Laura Carlsen is the Director of the Americas Program at the Center for International Policy. She joins us from Mexico City. And with us from Idaho via Skype is Stephen Yates, a national security analyst and commentator. He's currently CEO of DC International Advisory. Thanks to all of you for joining us. Let's start in Idaho with Stephen. Stephen, there appears to be mixed messages being sent here when it comes to immigration policy. We just heard General Kelly there, the Homeland Security Chief, tell us that there will be no mass deportations, no use of military force. But earlier we heard President Trump tell us that there would be he said there would be a military operation in expelling drugs gangs. To quote the president, he said, they're rough and they're tough, but not tough like our people. So are we getting two messages here?
Well, I think we're seeing a bit of a pattern with all of our alliances, whether it's Europe, Japan coming to the United States, and now with Mexico, we've got one level, the president was elected in some ways to stir things up and recalibrate, rebalance relations, trade, security, and a whole range of issues. Alliances are being called into questions and right-sized. And then with regard to the immigration challenge, there's no question that President Trump, as candidate and as president, has pushed a hard rhetorical line on where things will go. A lot of voters support a stricter interpretation and enforcement of law as it's written. And so you've had that tone, but I think what these officials are saying, whether they're going to Europe, Japan, or Mexico, is consistent. They're looking at programs as they've been implemented in the past, maybe rolling back some of the Obama policies, but not going to the extremes that I think a lot of people fear.
Eric, here we have Mexico, which is a close ally of the United States. But if we look at the election campaign, if we look at the period after President Trump assumed office, he's called Mexicans names, Mexicans who are undocumented here in the United States, talked about building a wall, talked about tearing up NAFTA at worst. Is he risking this relationship?
Well, the things that he said are clearly for U.S. domestic consumption, but Mexican people also watch the news and they read the newspaper and they follow Twitter. And so there is an impact in Mexico. And if your close friend to the north is stigmatizing you, whether you're citizens in your country or you're citizens in their country, yeah, it does have an impact. And there's a lot of questioning right now going on in Mexico, and indeed among a lot of people, not just in Mexico, saying, what's the end game here? What's the ultimate purpose? It's one thing to address some of the immigration issues, and we've heard a little bit about that, or maybe have a different approach on trade. But if in trying to do so, you're risking or you're putting at risk the fundamental nature of a relationship that spans a long period of time and also, frankly, a very large geographic border. We share a 2,000-mile border. The question then is the risk higher than the reward?
Laura, the visit by Secretaries Tillerson and Kelly to Mexico, they're being billed as a fence-mending exercise. Do you think there's been any improvement since they got down there?
I doubt that there's been any improvement in terms of the opinion of the Mexican population, and that's very, very important. Because if we look carefully at the press statement that was offered, there were no real agreements or any changes. And what we had before the visit is very important. Exactly as happened in January, just 2 days before the visit, there was an act that directly sabotaged any possibility of really mending the relationship, and that was the issuing of these internal memorandum on Homeland Security that included, now Kelly is saying it won't be mass deportation, but the criteria in those clauses of the memorandum are so broad that it has struck fear in the heart of Mexicans all over the United States. Most people are eligible for deportation because it defines a crime as a crime that's been convicted, a crime that's been charged, or a crime that some ICE agent thinks might exist, and it also defines immigration infractions as a crime. And then we have the very provocative element of saying that they will deport Central Americans to Mexico. And Mexicans came out, even Mexican officials came out very clearly and said that is utterly unacceptable. So we've seen a lot of discourse about mending fences. There's an interest on the part of the Mexican government to make things look better. It's important for financial markets, it's important for investors and for transnational business. But the fact of the matter is that the root issues that have caused the tension between the two nations still exist.
Stephen, let's take a listen to what President Trump had to say about illegal immigration. Let's watch.
We're in the middle of a crisis on our southern border. The unprecedented surge of illegal migrants from Central America is harming both Mexico and the United States, and I believe the steps we will take, starting right now, will improve the safety in both of our countries.
So, Stephen, explain that to us. President Trump is making the point there that what he's doing is going to help the United States as well as Mexico. Yet, as Laura just pointed out, if there are undocumented Central American immigrants in the United States, they're going to be expelled to Mexico.
Well, I think the president is getting at one of the core fundamentals that perhaps will animate his policy, but really we've had so many distractions when talking about immigration and U.S. Mexico relations. Really, what the president is saying is that this migration that goes through Mexico and into the United States is a problem for Mexico and the United States. The drug cartels, crime elements that come back and forth, those are a problem for Mexico and for the United States. The target of a lot of these comments and sometimes the broader conjecture is not aimed at all Mexicans. It's heard that way, and I understand that. But it's really aimed at these problems that seem to come through Mexico and go back and forth across the border. To the extent that our governments can focus on mitigating, managing, and hopefully curtailing those kinds of things, I think we're going to have a more positive tone on the policy agenda.
Right, Laura, is that what Mexicans hear, that this is a problem that's coming through Mexico rather than a problem for Mexico?
Well, there's a fundamental myth at the basis of all the security talk, and that is that unauthorized migration is a security threat. It simply is not. Even General Kelly has testified that there isn't an instance of terrorism coming up over the southern border. And it's clear statistically that immigrants, whether they're Central American or Mexican, are not the homicidal maniacs that Donald Trump has often portrayed them to be. So that means that what we really have to do here is separate out the immigration issue and start talking about these contradictions between labor flows that are needed, obviously needed in the United States, and the criminalization in which immigrants have been lumped in together with drug traffickers and other and real criminal elements as part of a security problem. Unless we separate those out, we're never going to be able to resolve these problems. Mexicans will continue to be vilified in this racist and xenophobic the way that we've seen during the campaign, and the tensions between our two countries will continue to deepen.
Eric, clearly the Mexican President Enrique Peña Nieto is not happy with these recent developments. He's expressed his anger in many ways. Let's take a listen to what he had to say recently.
Lamento y repruebo.
I regret and disapprove of the decision by the United States to continue with construction of the wall, which has for years, far from uniting us, divided us. Mexico does not believe in walls. I have said time and time again, Mexico will not pay for any wall.
So this was a unilateral action taken by the United States. It was not done in consultation with the Mexicans, and we heard that there from the Mexican president. But what leverage do the Mexicans have to change the current course of relations between the two countries?
Well, I think they have a lot of leverage. I mean, some of the issues we've been talking about, whether it's migration flows, whether it's cooperation on narcotics control and taking down the cartels, whether it's some of the security issues as well, the United States in some ways really needs Mexico as a partner to be able to do that effectively. By definition, things that are coming from Central America to the United States are going to pass through Mexico. It sure is a lot easier to address those issues as partners and friends, and to have Mexico as an ally doing that. In terms of some of the unilateral actions, I mean, sure, the United States can build a wall, and Mexico has actually even acknowledged that. We're a sovereign country. We can build walls in our own country wherever we want to. What Mexico has said is they're not going to pay for that wall, and they've questioned whether building a wall is actually going to address the issues that the United States wants to address, and will do it in an effective way. I think those are issues that do have to be looked at pretty seriously. But Mexico has a lot of leverage, and it really goes to the heart of cooperation. And I think we also have to remember that where we are with the United States and Mexico is not something that we can take for granted. I mean, Mexico and the United States, as I mentioned earlier, have a long relationship, a long history, but a lot of that history has been not very friendly toward each other. And it's only been in recent years, really since the advent of NAFTA in 1994, that the United States and Mexico have developed over time a relationship where we can actually look to each other with trust and cooperation. And so arguably, the relationship has been better than it's been in the past, but we can't take that for granted. And to the extent that Mexico thinks that the United States is blaming them or casting doubt on that relationship, or frankly saying that that relationship is counterproductive and we don't want to do it anymore, it's very easy to chart a path from here to a future date where that cooperation that we've depended on for so long really is not forthcoming. And in the end, it's the United States that suffers.